Hello, my name is Emily, and I'm here today with the nationally recognized authority in trust clause litigation, Dan Dalton. How are you today, Dan?
Emily, I am doing great. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well. So, Dan, it's been a few months since you've provided an update on the state of the United Methodist Church. So, why don't you tell everybody what's going on?
Thanks, Emily. It really has been an interesting couple of months. It's now July of 2023, and we just got past the annual conference season, the June annual conference season. So you have the annual conferences where the offices are now closed for a little bit for a vacation. You have new pastors that are joining new parishes and new churches throughout the country. And you've had a lot of churches disaffiliate. We are now over 6,000 churches, or 20% of all of the United Methodist churches in the United States have left. Far greater than I ever imagined. I thought earlier this year it'd be around 2,000. 6,000 is pretty amazing. And out of that 6,000, which is of 30,000 churches or so, that comprises a little more than 70% of the budget of the United Methodist Church. So even though it's just 20% of the number of churches, it's almost 3/4 of all the income going through that denomination. So I think the denomination right now is kind of sitting back and wondering kind of what happened. What I've seen throughout the country is there's been a number of conferences that have just thought themselves, and the board of trustees have gotten together and said, litigation's not working for us. It's too expensive. It's too unpredictable. We're losing these cases. We're winning a couple, but overall, they weren't doing well, and they couldn't see it self-sustaining throughout. So as one chancellor said, they just ripped the Band-Aid off and said, if you want to go, you can go. And there's been a number of conferences that have done that. And so we've seen a lot of churches that have left in Texas and in Missouri and Kentucky and Tennessee, for example. A number of those churches in Ohio as well, where the board of trustees have just said if they want to leave, they can leave. And they have, the process, of course, is not easy, but they have let churches go. Now, I think what we're seeing after the annual conference season is kind of a regrouping and a retrenching of a lot of the bishops and denominational leaders are looking at the numbers and they're thinking, wow, we cannot sustain ourselves anymore. We're not even close to what they had thought they could sustain themselves. So you're seeing terms of disaffiliation change to the end of this year. So like in the Alabama West Florida conference, it's pretty much made it impossible for churches to leave. You see in California, the California Pacific conference, and also as well as the Baltimore, Maryland conference, you have to have 50% of the fair market value of your property, plus pension, plus healthcare, plus, which really makes it almost impossible for these churches to leave. So, you've seen a lot more churches leave than what we thought would leave. And we've also seen a number of conferences that are putting up the wall that are saying no more. They're kind of drawing the line in the sand, not allowing churches to really have an ability to leave on an amicable basis in many conferences. Not all conferences, but in many conferences, they're really putting a stop to disaffiliation.
So, Dan, what does that mean for pastors and their pensions?
Well, for the ones that stay, of course, there's no impact. The ones who are retired, there's no impact as to pension. They're always going to have their pension. But healthcare, there's going to be an impact depending on what conference you're in. There's been some bishops that have taken the position that if a retired pastor leaves the denomination, and especially if it joins the Global Methodist Church, the supplemental the supplemental healthcare that they've paid in for decades will be cut off to them. They just completely cut them off, which is really unfortunate and in some respects kind of evil from their perspective. But we've seen that. Pensions, though, are protected. And so under most states, even though from a federal standpoint, it's not protected because it's not a ERISA plan, a federally employment a federal pension plan, because they've exempted themselves out of ERISA. But under state law, most states, in fact, all states have a pension type law like ERISA, and they're protected there. But other benefits like healthcare and some other things that they retirees that they used to have, those are gone. For current pastors, I know that if they're going independent, it's very difficult for them to stay within Westpath. Westpath has kind of made that decision not to necessarily service them. So their window has closed, their valuation has been reduced. So they're left, and their local church is left with getting them a 403B plan or some other 401k plan, kind of through a Fidelity or another type of brokerage house to assist them, and actually putting in more money to make up for that loss from what Westpath has done to them. And pastors that are going to the Global Methodist Church, they're seeing their pension, they're going to see a new pension plan created there. And the UMC part is going to close on that pension plan, but a new pension plan will start with the Global Methodist Church. So they'll essentially have two different pensions that'll be going when they retire. But I think the more savvy pastors, the ones in larger churches in particular, they've seen how Westpath hasn't been the most helpful to them. So they've gone out to their people in their congregation that work at financial planners like at Merrill Lynch or Fidelity or whoever, American Funds, pick up a 403B plan or a 401k plan or a Roth IRA or something to help them with their retirement. But that's generally what we're seeing right now. Now, things may change. Things have changed dramatically through this whole process in the last 3 years. So that might change in the future. But right now, that's kind of what we're seeing with that groundwork.
So what does all of this mean for churches in the discernment process right now?
Well, it's going to be tougher for them. On the positive side of things, the window of leaving under Section 2553 remains until December 31st. So there is a way out under the current process. On the other positive side, there's been some conferences that have extended the way out under 25493B, which is exigent circumstances. So the South Carolina conference, for example, the entire conference uses 25493B to get let out. There's another conference that announced that it will let local churches use 25493B to go out through 2024 as well. So there are some conferences that will be flexible and allow churches out. And again, I think the vast majority of conferences here in the United States have just taken the approach of like, if churches want to leave, they can leave. However, when they get to the annual conference vote, therein lies the rub. You're going to have an Arkansas problem. You know, with Arkansas, there's one church left, Jonesboro, where we have that situation where Jonesboro and two others were not voted out by the annual conference, and improperly, we believe. We're going to probably see that more often, where you're going to see some conferences where the delegates will not allow local churches to leave, so they won't get that 50% threshold at the annual conference to leave. So we'll see that happening as well, especially when the budget numbers continue to come in and show just a dramatic and precipitous drop in income for the conferences and for the local churches as well, who were supported by the larger churches who have since left. But there is that process that continues, and I would still encourage local churches that between now and the end of the year, if the annual conference is all having a fall annual conference or winter annual conference, take advantage of that time. Use that time between now and then to do your discernment and to run through the processes to leave if you can. Again, there's not all conferences that are going to allow that. There's some conferences that are doing things a little bit more stricter, or putting up roadblocks, procedural roadblocks to preclude churches from leaving, like by saying you have to get all your paperwork in by, July 5th, and today is July 6th, things like that. We've seen that in conferences. But, there is that path right now. And if you can do it and you want to leave, I certainly would take advantage of this time to do that right now.
So some conferences, more churches are being let out than other conferences. Why is that?
Well, it comes down to leverage with the legal process. That's really my belief. You don't have some conferences that are more benevolent than others. It's really about whether they can enforce the trust clause or not in their state. So you'll see in Texas, for example, where the law is pretty clear that both in the express and implied trust clause is going to be unenforceable. So you have in all the conferences in Texas, you've just had a huge drop of churches leaving because they just don't have any leverage to enforce the trust clause. Then you have churches like in California or in Maryland, where the case law, and more importantly in those states, there's state statutes that will enforce the trust clause. So in Maryland, in Wisconsin and California and several other states, years ago, bishops and annual conferences lobbied the state legislatures to enact state laws that provide that as a matter of state law, the trust clause is enforceable. And because of that, they have the leverage to leave. So that's why Maryland, for example, can be very confident by saying, we're going to charge you 50% to leave, because they have a state statute and they have case laws interpreting that statute that's going to enforce that. Texas is the complete opposite, and that's why you have so many churches leaving in Texas. In Ohio, it's the same thing. You have a lot of churches leaving Ohio. And then you have in Wisconsin, you don't have a lot of churches leaving simply because of the statute and a variety of other reasons. So depending on what state you're in the leverage that they have based on the enforceability of the trust clause, that's kind of where we see where the line is being drawn, where the churches, the conferences where more churches are allowed to leave, those are churches where the trust clause is questionable and likely unenforceable. In conferences where there's not a lot of churches that have left, or the bar is so high to leave, quite frankly, it's not because the churches don't want to leave, it's just because they can't. Because they know that the leverage from a legal standpoint is that much different. I'm not saying in those states there's no way out from a legal perspective. I'm just saying that the bar is a lot higher, and it's just going to take that much more work for the local church to leave from a legal perspective. And that's just kind of the cards that we're dealt with right now.
And finally, Dan, what are you hearing from churches that have left the denomination?
You know, they are just relieved. They're excited. There's a fresh new spirit in the church and in the community, and they're growing. You know, these churches, it's just amazing to me. You know, I've read the stories and I've seen them and clients where, you know, they might be down to 20 members that attend, and you have a couple hundred people that are members. But they get out of the denomination, and now they're up to 400 people every week worshiping and attending and joining the local church. And you know, we've had churches that have just doubled, tripled, quadrupled in size. Their giving has increased. You know, you've had people coming from other Methodist churches who aren't getting out and don't want to leave and joining those local churches as well. And you're just seeing a real renewed spirit within those churches. You know, I think about half the churches have gone to the Global Methodist Church. There's a lot of churches that feel like they need to be part of a denomination and they feel comfortable with what they have. I mean, the Global Methodist Church is really led by people who used to be the leaders in the United Methodist Church, and they're familiar. Local churches are familiar with bishops and annual conferences and district superintendents and the discipline and all that. And a lot of churches like that, and that's okay. There's a number of churches, I think, that the larger churches, the ones who are a little bit more successful, the ones that are a little bit more, you know, that they don't really need a denomination as used to be in years past. They're generally independent. You know, they're seeing that they can grow on their own and they can sustain themselves, and they can be connected through other means, like through missions or maybe through a loose affiliation. But from a denominational standpoint, they're not really seeing the benefit of it all. And I think my sense is, in just talking to clients, is I think that's kind of where we're going to see a lot of churches grow. I think immediately you're going to see churches kind of go to a denomination, whether it's the Global Methodist Church or Free Methodists or Nazarenes or somewhere else. And then you're going to see other churches that are going to say, you know, this just isn't for me. I want to be independent. I want to be connected somehow, but I want to be independent from a denomination. And it's just, at least that just seems what the trend is right now. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to it, to join a denomination. I just think that it's really up to that local ethos of the local church. But just kind of bringing it full circle is, you know, I think most churches are surprised how enthusiastic and how the members are and how the churches have grown since they've left the United Methodist Church. And the pastors feel this pressure that's off their shoulders that they used to have from being a part of a dying denomination, and they're just so happy to be out of it and moving forward and doing ministry and missions. But that's kind of what they got into, and then why they wanted to become pastors. So very exciting time for the local churches.
Well, as always, thank you for your insight, Dan. If your church is interested in hiring our firm, please reach out to our office at 313-859-6000 or email us today. Thank you.